Okay, so being a fan board, we have lots of questions from our members regarding the books and the things you've contributed to Star Wars universe, because you've done quite a few, especially in recent years, contributing to the Star Wars universe with Legacy of the Force, the Old Republic, and of course the Force Unleashed. So we have some questions about...
Except I didn't have anything to do with Legacy of the Force. I just need to tell you that in advance.
So was that mainly just Shane Dix, or did you just... Well, I guess no, you were Jedi Order, sorry.
New Jedi Order, that's right, yeah.
Yeah,
I just want to take credit for anything that I didn't actually do.
New Jedi Order. I confused them. That's
right.
The Mega Series.
That's right, yes. The series from hell.
So I guess we'll start with that one. New Jedi Order was, it started in, 1999, I think, with Vector Prime, with R.A. Salvatore. And then spanned, I want to say 5 or 6 years of my life. I just remember buying books for that series for a long time, 3 or 4 years. So what was it like writing in a mega series with, 8 authors, 16 books, not even more than that. Tons of books, a massive storyline. How did that come to pass, and how did you feel your contribution was?
I think it was 17 books in the end, wasn't it? I think 17 from first to last. It was fantastic. I mean, I said series from hell, but I was kind of joking. It was hard work for everybody, and I think everybody came out of it swearing they wouldn't do anything like that again, even though it was an amazing experience and an incredible story. We came into it sort of midway through the writing process. Shane and I had been writing not Star Wars novels, but we were both we both are very big Star Wars fans, and fans of a British space opera show called Blake Seven. We wrote a space opera series called Evergence, which we wanted to be a cross between Star Wars and Blake Seven, so it's a slightly darker version of Star Wars. And our 3 books were out and had done quite well, and they were kind of in the Star Wars mode. So when about midway through the writing of the Force Unleashed, the New Jedi Order series, I think they were looking for new writers, new people to come into the series and add some new ideas, add some new stories, and we were the people they invited to be part of it. So I remember distinctly getting a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning from my agent in New York, who I'd actually never spoken to before. We'd sold several books together, never spoken, and he said, you know how you always wanted to do a Star Wars novel? I said, yeah. And he said, I've got you 3. So ring these people, email these people, whatever they say, just say yes. Whatever they ask you to do, say yes. So by the 6 o'clock the next morning, 2 hours later, I had flights booked to Skywalker Ranch. I knew we were part of this series, but I didn't quite know how big it was going to be. And they flew me across for a sort of a brainstorming session in Skywalker Ranch with Walter John Williams, who wrote the book before us, from memory.
Yeah, I think he wrote Destiny's Way or something just before that.
That's right, he did. So we had a sort of a session there where I was head of the series Bible, which was sort of 2 inches thick. It was huge, containing all the background to the Eugene Vong, all the background to the synopses for the stories. And they said, turn to page 232. Which I did, and they said those 3 paragraphs there are the synopses for your 3 books. Now you can ignore the first 2 because we're not using that character anymore. That 1 paragraph is kind of where it stands. We're here to turn this into an outline for 3 books. So it was a kind of intense few days, nutting out story ideas, and in the lead up to that meeting, I'd read all the manuscripts of the books that had existed to that point, which I think was about maybe 8 or 9. Because everybody was madly. I think it was a book every 3 months, the release schedule, wasn't it? Yeah. So there were a lot of manuscripts kind of coming in various stages of editing and development, and it was a huge catch-up. But it was, it was my first time writing in Star Wars. I kind of dropped off reading the extended universe novels, although I loved them earlier. So it was a great way to kind of dive back into Star Wars, dive back into the universe. And the deeper I got into it, the more exciting it became. One of the things I loved about working in the New Jedi Order was because, everything... if you've read the series, you know that the whole galaxy is kind of in a real mess, and it's huge enemies kind of sweeping through it, attacking people willy-nilly, including the Jedi. And one of the things that I loved about being able to story sort of workshop in this universe was that you could say, oh, look, there's this particular planet and this particular alien species that was mentioned by an author, 5 years ago, and we've never heard from them since. can I use them? And they'd always say, yeah, sure. And then I'd say, can I like destroy them? And they'd go, about half the time they'd say, yeah, sure. So I got to kind of tie up all these loose ends in sometimes very violent ways, or sometimes expand their cultures and add new details. So that was a real pleasure, as well as, I remember the first day I sat down to write the first page of the first book, there was dialogue from Princess Leia, and I was kind of staring at the screen thinking, how can I do this? how can I give words to this amazing character that has been in my life ever since I was 10 years old? How can I possibly do it? It was a bit of a hurdle to get over, but I did. So, and it was great fun.
So you said you had been sort of out of the EU universe before that. So I take it you didn't read like Vector Prime before you actually got involved in New Jedi Order?
That's right. I hadn't read it. I knew the series was out there, but I hadn't started it. I was thinking, wait till the whole thing was done, and then, spend a month reading through it.
So, what was your first reaction to, Chewbacca's death in Vector Prime, and then, the beginning of the onslaught after that, with all these characters dying left and right?
Well, I guess I knew at that point that Chewbacca's death was coming, and but it was still a bit of a shock. And the body count was so amazingly high. I think the most emotional moment for me in that series was Star by Star.
Yes.
Yeah. It's where Anakin Solo dies. That's the one, isn't it?
Yep.
Sorry, spoiler alert for those who haven't read the series.
It's like a decade old. It's fine.
Yeah, good. But it was such an amazing moment. It was very moving, very powerful, and the whole book kind of worked up to this huge, conclusion. And it was fantastic, I guess I knew the synopses for all the stories, and so I kind of knew what was going to happen. But the very best of those novels, like Star by Star, still had that kind of sucker punch feeling where, even though you knew it was coming, it was still so immensely powerful.
Yeah, Star by Star is probably my favorite in that series. And it wasn't just Anakin's death, but also you had, if I can pronounce his name, Boris Fillet, the Bothan, leader. But at the same time, you hated him all throughout the series because he's annoying the entire series. He hates the Jedi, he's going against them, and then he goes out in the most blaze of glory fashion possible.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great book and a huge book. It's an enormous book. I think it's the centerpiece of the whole series. The whole series revolves around that particular book. Although I think every book, has its strengths, and I think our books were great fun to write, and I hope people like them, and we got to kill a few people as well, which I'm very proud of.
That's true.
But we were sort of in the awkward position of we were sort of a run up towards the end, and the ending was sort of this shifting target. I hope I'm not speaking out of school saying this. I think there are a few things that changed when we were writing the third book, or after we'd written the third book, that we then had to go back and rewrite and change, and it made for some complicated rewriting, but always for a better book, always for a better story.
Okay, so one last question before I let my co-host in here, so, it's not jumbled. When you wrote the Force Heretic books, the three of them, did you write them as, the first one as the first act, second one as second act, write them as one that kind of flowed together, or did you write one at a time and try to figure out where you're going from each one?
Well, I wrote the synopsis for all three. I wrote the synopsis on the way back from Skywalker Ranch, so pretty early on the story was set, and all the books were written separately. I was under a really insane schedule at that point. I had to write a book every 3 months for 2.5 years, so I was writing 4 books a year in very different genres as well. So 3 of them were Star Wars, and the other 6 were other things. So I kind of had to stagger the books. So I would do the first Force Heretic book, and then I'd write something else, and then I'd do the second Force Heretic book, and then write 2 other books, and then write the third Force Heretic books. They were designed to be kind of definitely separate books, although, you read them as a trilogy. It was designed to be a trilogy, but they weren't written in one big kit. I think they read better for that. I think each book has its kind of separate themes and separate arcs, and I hope they read better for that.
So you kind of just locked yourself up with your computer and just wrote straight for
2.5 years, Yeah, that was really hard work. I'll never do it again. But it was good. I had to write 1,500 words every day. It was a very immersive process and slightly sort of crazy making. By the end of it, I really needed a holiday. But what I'm a writer want to do. I don't really want to do anything else. I just want to write. So, and writing the Star Wars novels were an absolute joy. Particularly, I think the third one I really like writing because I got to dabble with some older characters like Anakin Skywalker and others. You know, there was some weird little kind of sort of references to the past, which were just huge fun, really great fun, to Luke's past. So that was terrific. You know, I'm a big fan of Wikipedia. As soon as I get sucked into Wikipedia, I might not come out for hours, and I'll just skip from sort of page to page. And every now and again, I'll come across a page that is something that I've created. You know, I was stuck in a book, and that gives me an immense feeling of pleasure. I've contributed to this enormous universe.
Awesome. So just so you know, this is my co-host, Ket. He's the one from New Jersey that we mentioned before.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Apologies for taking so dang long. Unfortunately, life is odd like that.
Yeah, no problem. No apologies required.
So just to
very nice to meet you, sir. Very nice to meet you indeed.
And nice to meet you too, both of you. Very nice to be talking.
Excellent. It's awesome to talk Star Wars. And just so you know, Ket, we were just talking about the new Jedi Order, which is the first books which Sean here is able to write in the Star Wars universe.
Great book.
So you mentioned how you were able to go to Skywalker Ranch at the beginning. What was it like to go to Skywalker Ranch?
Ooh, do tell.
It was a trip. You know, it was only my second time in the United States, so it was kind of trippy in that respect. My first time in San Francisco, I was jet lagged. It should have been a holiday, you know. It should have, because I was in the States. It should have been a holiday, but every spare moment, every waking moment was spent catching up on the new Jedi Order series. So I was kind of in this foreign land, eating this great food, and living in Star Wars at the same time. So on the first day, I was taken out to the ranch. I mean, it's beautiful up there. The hills are absolutely fantastic, and it's in the most incredible location and is the most incredibly beautiful place. You know, I'm sure you've heard stories about how lovely it is up there, and being taken through the offices and being explained not to bother George if he comes up to say hello. You know, you can say hello back, but otherwise let him do his work. He's a busy man.
Did you get to see him?
I got to see him, yeah. He was eating in one of the restaurants, one of the sort of eating places on the ranch. He was there, you know, kind of 2 tables across. So I've been in the same room as George Lucas, you know, which kind of made me sort of intensely excited.
Did you have a fanboy moment where you like didn't know if you wanted to talk to him, or you were just too scared to actually try to look him in the face?
Well, Sue Rastoni kind of leaned over and said, "Don't freak out, but George is just over there." And I kind of did freak out a little bit on the inside. I didn't know whether to look or, you know, do a dance or just explode. But I just sort of went, "Oh wow, okay, I'm not going to freak out," and just kept eating my lunch. So it was an amazing experience to be in the same place as this fellow who had a huge influence on the world and on my life. But it was actually great. I mean, it kind of hammered home several things. One of them was, you know, how huge Star Wars is. You know it's big, but until you see the size of the ranch and now the Presidio and the huge numbers of people who work in there, and the immense sort of materials that go with it. You know, everywhere you look, there was a statue of Darth Vader, or, you know, posters from, you know, Italy or Japan or wherever. So that was amazing. But it was also great to realize that it was not just okay, but it was my job to sit in this room and talk about Star Wars. You know, that was quite empowering, you know. Normally, you know, my family's not that interested. Well, you know, the kids really like Star Wars, and my wife's a professor of English. You know, we don't spend a lot of time sitting around talking about Star Wars. But for those few days and for several months of the coming year, it was going to be my entire life. And to be meeting people and talking with people for whom it was also their entire life, that was kind of cool.
So you were there when they were making episode 3. So were you looking around trying to see if you could see anything that you could tell the fanboys at home?
Yes, inside info, recon mission.
I don't think we were up to episode 3 yet. I think I remember what I was talking about with my editor. She just read the script of episode 2. So it must have been between episode 1 and 2.
Okay. But still, were you looking around for inside information about what you're going to get?
I had a list of people at home who all wanted me to bring back souvenirs, you know, George Lucas's pen or that kind of stuff. Even a piece of toilet paper. One guy just said, "Just bring me a piece of toilet paper. You know, that'll make me happy." So I spent a lot of money in the souvenir store. You know,
Did you go to Jabba the Hutt?
No, I didn't.
That seems to be the place where a lot of people like to go, the coffee shop, Java the Hutt down there.
Yeah, I actually don't drink coffee, so it didn't occur to me. But I have a few people have asked, and I feel bad now for not going. I could have had a decaf, but
that's true. So, you started work with the New Jedi Order, which you wrote with Shane Dix, and then you had this lull, and then they suddenly call you about The Force Unleashed.
Yeah, that lull really worried me because I loved working in Star Wars and I really wanted to do more. So I'd email Shelley Shapiro, my editor at Del Rey, and say, so got any openings? I'd like to do some more. And every year she'd say, oh, no, we're fully booked. And of course, what happens with Star Wars is you book up all these slots, years in advance. So, and those people who are in those slots were producing and they didn't need any more books from anybody, not from me. But I was starting to take it personally and I was thinking, did they really hate working with me? Were those books really bad? I mean, I thought they were good books. I really liked them. So I started to get a bit paranoid, and I actually stopped emailing Shelley. And then out of nowhere, I got this email from, I forgot his name. My memory's going. But he emailed to say, look, we've got this computer game coming out. You might have heard of it. It's called The Force Unleashed. We've decided we're going to do a novelisation. Would you be interested? And so I shot back a response straight away saying, I'm really interested for several reasons. One, because I wanted to do another Star Wars book, and B, because I'd heard about the game and I wanted to know more about it. And the third reason was because I grew up reading novelizations. I read all the Terrence Dicks novelizations of Doctor Who. I read the Alan Dean Foster novelizations of Star Wars and Alien and many other movies. And I'd always thought I'd like to do a novelisation, and none of the film novelisations that I kind of pursued had come off. But I thought, well, a computer game novelisation is close. I figured it'll be kind of different, but I decided I'd really go for it. So I emailed Keith, it was Keith at Shelley Shapiro at Del Rey, and said, yes, I'm really interested. What's it about? And he said, it's about Darth Vader's secret apprentice, and it's set in the dark times before episode 4. And I didn't need to hear anything more than that. I just said, yes, absolutely. I totally want to do this because, Darth Vader's secret apprentice, holy crap, and the dark times, you just didn't know very much about those times, and the opportunity to get a window into those times was completely irresistible. So I mailed back and said, yes, absolutely, sign me up. I'll make whatever space I need to make to write this book. Thanks for asking. So it did come out of nowhere, but it was maybe it was because I'd nagged Shelley so many times so often, or maybe it's because I stopped nagging.
Combination of both.
Yeah, that's right. I made sure they wouldn't forget me, and I stopped annoying. Yeah.
Oh man, that's kind of insane though, because I mean, if I were in your position, I'd be like, yeah. I want to do that. Give me that. I want to do that. Let's do this.
But don't forget, at that time, Star Wars computer games didn't have the best reputation in the world. They were cool because they were Star Wars, but they weren't.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Right? As far as video games in the whole goes, not the best of reputations.
So I didn't want. I wanted to hear the story, get some kind of idea for the story before I said yes, because I didn't want to get stuck with something that was really lame. Oh yeah. I love Jedi Knight and Jedi Knight 2, but I'm not sure what I could have done with Kyle Katarn's. It was Kyle Katarn, wasn't it? Yeah. I'm not sure what I could have done with his character in a novelisation. So I really wanted to know a little bit more. But as soon as, Darth Vader's secret apprentice, I like sort of characters that are kind of in between the dark and the light. I like characters that all Shane and I, our favourite characters in the Force Heritage books were the ones that could go either way. I mean, you knew Luke was never going to turn. You knew Han wasn't going to turn. You knew Leia wasn't going to turn. They're kind of fixed points in the Star Wars universe. It's still great to write about them, but you kind of know where they sit. But, some of the kids you didn't quite know where they were going to end up, and some of the secondary characters you didn't quite know. So the thought of Darth Vader's secret apprentice, who accidentally creates or inadvertently creates the rebellion, what a mess of contradictions and conflicted kind of personalities, just right there in that one sentence. So I thought, brilliant, I'm in, I'm going to enjoy this. And then when I got the script, it was, just brilliant. The script was fantastic. It had everything that I wanted, and there were so many different ways to flesh out the story that I was very excited.
I would be too. I mean, that actually makes me wonder. Like, was it really difficult to adapt a sort of video game plot into a novel?
When I got the script, and I I don't know whether you've played the game and read the book, but there are structural differences between the two. Although you can certainly tell in the first third of the book that it is kind of based on that level kind of game playing structure. The first thing, the script is devised as a series of levels, and the first thing I had to do was try and work out how I was going to turn that into a novel structure, because they're organised very differently. The whole boss thing doesn't play out the same way in novels as a basic point, and
yeah, it's kind of hard to like novelize a quick time event, so to speak.
And then even the games themselves aren't even all the same. Like the Wii one and the PSP one, different levels than the other ones, and
that's right.
Yeah,
and the only and I didn't have any of the gameplay scripts. I only had the cutscene scripts. So the backbone of the story was the cutscene scripts. That's all I had. I didn't get any of the gameplay scripts at all. So when the book kicks into what the gameplay in the game, none of that dialogue matches what happens in any of the computer games, because I didn't have any of that. And so there's some big differences there at various points. But I really enjoyed playing with flashbacks and the sort of non-linear kind of structure of the stories, because I felt that was a way to kind of rearrange the gameplay script in a way that made sense for the book. And the stories themselves are very much, particularly the second one, is very much about the past and about memory and about who Starkiller is. And there are sort of aspects of his past that he unlocks as he travels, to use a game term. So it felt sensible to me to kind of explore ways to take some of the visions that he sees elsewhere, or to turn some of the scenes that you see in the game and make them visions at different points in the story. So it was actually quite a complicated process, but one that I really enjoyed. It was like starting off with the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle kind of arranged in a line, and then you had to kind of reorganize them in a way that made a coherent picture. And I enjoyed it. And it was very difficult. Getting the first third to work was the hardest part, and I'm still not entirely sure that it works completely, but I think once the first third's out of the way, then you can see it all sort of looping back. You can see why it had to be that way. There were also a couple of levels that were cut. I think there's 11 or 13 levels in the game, and there were 2 or 3 levels that were cut from the script at the very last minute, and I begged and pleaded to have one of them put back in, because it was such an important scene for the evolution of Starkiller's character that I got the okay, which made me very, very
Which
grateful.
level was this?
Yes, do
This
tell.
was the level. Well, the level that stayed in was the one where Starkiller has to duel the droid, whose name I've temporarily forgotten. God, my memory's terrible today. What's his droid? What's the offsider's name? His droid who can adopt.
Oh. Yeah, the one that he uses that turns into Obi-Wan and stuff at the same time.
Oh yeah. Dang.
I it's one I can't believe I've forgotten it.
How do I forget this one?
Oh my God, it's right there too. This is horrible.
The first thing that came to mind was GLaDOS, but it's not GLaDOS. GLaDOS is Portal.
This is wrong. 2 Star Wars fanboys who host a podcast and a writer of Star Wars, and nobody can think of this.
I've got the manuscript here. I'm going to look it up.
Oh, cheat.
This is embarrassing.
Well, I'm embarrassing because I've written 2 books involving this character, and I should know. Okay.
Proxy.
That's it.
Yeah, it's Proxy.
Is where Starkiller has to duel Proxy and hits Proxy and stabs Proxy in order to kill the brain of the junk planet, the name of which I've also forgotten. So that whole sequence was in the game, slightly altered and changed, but was cut, or it played out in a very, very different way. So I said, no, we need to have that in there. That's a very important topic. But the other sequences involved the rescuing of.
Here we go again.
Garmbalithus, Leia, Mothma, whatever.
It was a storyline we ended up putting in the second book, the rescue of from Mon Calamari, the general.
That's right, Star Wars fans. Even the authors have trouble remembering these facts.
The guy who says it's a trap, him.
Admiral Akbar.
Admiral Akbar, but before he's Admiral, he's a prisoner on Mon Calamari. He has to be rescued. So, but I think in the original levels in Force Unleashed, they had to rescue Akbar before the crystal planet or the ice planet was destroyed. So they cut those levels because it caused too many continuity errors, and I think because it extended the story too long. So I was fine with those going. As long as the other one stayed. And then I got to rescue Admiral Akbar in the second book, so that's good.
Which is pretty good. So I have a question about, Kit has another question after this one. So with The Force Unleashed 2, I'm quite sure you've probably heard some of the weird backlash that at least LucasArts had about the game in general, because it was kind of short. Like compared to the first one, it's like half the length. Was Force Unleashed 2 actually planned to be that length, or was it like one longer story that they decided to cut down because they didn't have the resources or time to finish it the way they wanted to?
Definitely not complete. There has to be a Force Unleashed 3 in some form or other to finish that story. You know, that ending is such a brilliant ending, but it absolutely has to be resolved. And I'm hopeful that something will happen at some point and that I'll be involved in it, because I'm dying to write the ending of that story. But yeah, when the game was short, they produced it quickly using pre-existing resources. It's a good script and it's got great ideas, but it does suffer from being too short. And it was a real problem to novelize that book, because Starkiller's story was very much, it's still an exciting story, but it's very much a level-by-level, boss-by-boss, sort of it's like 1/3 of a novel, 1/2 at the absolute most. So when I was looking at the script, kind of scratching my head thinking, what am I going to do with this story and make it a novel? Starkiller, this was a problem with the first one. Starkiller's not very emotionally labile. He doesn't stop and think about stuff. He's very reactive. He's great at what he does, but he's not a very good viewpoint character in lots of ways, because he doesn't agonize over stuff or think about stuff as much as I would have liked. So when I was writing the first book, I was hunting around for a secondary viewpoint character, and I was thinking, well, it could be Darth Vader, except, he's just insanely hard to write. It could have been General Kota, but he's just like Starkiller. He doesn't talk very much. He kind of reacts. He's super smart. He's super experienced, but I don't imagine that he'd be a very good character to kind of sit around and ponder what he's going to do next, beyond planning the strategy. So Starkiller's pilot was the one that was left, and she was such an interesting character. Again, a really conflicted character caught between the Empire and the Rebellion. Juno Eclipse was the obvious one to make the secondary viewpoint, and I loved writing her story.
She's a fan favorite too. Juno is probably I like Juno better than Starkiller, probably because she's more of a dynamic character.
And she's less pushed around. She's making her own decisions. I know she's caught up in stuff. She's kind of dragged along with Starkiller, but she has lots and lots of choices. She has choices over and over again to leave Starkiller and doesn't take them, and I think that's really fantastic. So when it came to the second book, I really wanted Juno's viewpoint in there as well, because it's not – The Force Unleashed is not just Starkiller's story, it's also Juno's story now. So I had this wonderful opportunity, which I'm really grateful for, to flesh out not just Juno's story, running parallel to Starkiller's story, but also the story of the Rebellion, which is the other kind of story that's embedded in The Force Unleashed. So rescuing Akbar, dealing with the arguments between Mon Mothma and Garmbil Iblis, and seeing Leia getting more involved. I mean, that was an absolute joy, and you couldn't have put that in a computer game script, but it fit perfectly in the novel. I felt that it fit perfectly in the novel, and it was I had so much fun with that, and I got to create new characters, create new complications for Juno. Juno, that sort of love triangle thing that's in there as well. She's a smart, capable woman. She thought Starkiller was dead. She's beautiful. Why wouldn't some guy have a complete crush on her, and why wouldn't she feel sort of guilted and conflicted about that? I had so much fun writing with her. So if there's a third, and if I'm involved, she's got to be there.
Oh, yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, who wouldn't? It's like, honestly, does anybody really even need to ask that question? I'm pretty sure we all would.
Plus, that's like the British voice.
That's true. But, that does bring up the question, though. With the video game and all that, writing Starkiller and kind of exploring that whole thing and, the dark times, did you end up actually maybe trying to play the game too, just to kind of see what they had going on as far as the video game story fleshed out?
I always wanted to, but the games weren't finished by the time I'd written the books. So
did you end up playing them after?
I've got two things running against me when it comes to playing those games. One, I'm an old Atari boy, and any joystick more complicated than that kind of breaks my brain. And also I've got RSI, so my hands hurt. So anytime I kind of play these games, I can't play for very long. But what I do is, as soon as the cutscenes end up on YouTube, I get to watch them. I watch the gameplay on YouTube, and I watch my boys play the computer game. So my youngest stepson's playing Force Unleashed 2 at the moment again, so I'm often dropping in just to watch the gameplay. But with the first book, one of the developers was actually here in Adelaide, South Australia, an office of Chrome here, so I got to see one of the levels being played out just after I'd written the first draft. So I got to go back and tinker a little bit with some of the scene settings then. But yeah, the game system exists. I got lots of sort of rough screenshots and concept art, but usually it's concept art and game docs.
So you can at least get to see part of it. Like they gave you like the visual of it.
Yeah, they gave me the feel of it. So there's quite a lot of divergence between the games and the books. Hopefully, well, I'm sure the backbone's there. It's still the same story, but chapter by chapter. Like the scene where Starkiller is going through the forests of Kashyyyk in the first book. You know, that's very different to what happens in the game because I didn't know what was going to happen in the game, so I just did whatever I thought was cool. So it's kind of a different... In a way, I'm the first person who got to play that game because I got to play it out the way I wanted to play a game set in a Star Wars universe. Yeah,
dude, so, that's old school. That's like those storybooks, the role play storybooks, where like you sit there and you read it. It's like, what do? You do this. Turn to this page,
and now you die. Oh, wait, go back.
No, go back. I didn't go to that page. I never left. My hand did not leave the page.
That's right. So that's kind of the way I viewed it, and that's why I had so much fun writing those books. I had to write them under really intensely short timelines for various reasons, but I had so much fun doing it because it felt like a computer game and writing a novel at the same time, you know. And I knew what the plot was going to be because it was there in the script, so I knew exactly where it was going to go. And I had some fantastic, absolutely brilliant lines of dialogue there from the scriptwriter. You know, it was an absolute joy. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more.
If they just gave you Force Unleashed 3 to write, just saying finish it up, because I don't know if they'll make the game or not, because LucasArts has done lots of changes over the past few years. But if they said you can finish up this story any way you'd like, how would you like to finish it up?
I've actually sent Shelley Shapiro, my editor, a synopsis, so she knows how I'd like to end it. It's a really difficult call. Part of me is desperate to write this book because I want to do it. Part of me is terrified to write this book because how do you give a satisfying conclusion to this story in a way that also satisfyingly explains why Starkiller and Juno are in the universe at the Battle of Yavin? You know, why aren't they there? Are they dead? If they're not dead, what the hell's happened to them? You know, and I have some thoughts on that I won't reveal, just in case it happens one day. I don't want to spoil the ending, but you know, one of the key things I love about those books is there's always a big fight. You know, there's a kick-ass fight with Vader at the end of the first book, culminating what you think is Starkiller's death. There's another huge fight at the end of the second book. Now, who's the big fight going to be between at the end of book 3? Story 3, and that I think is part. I mean, the books aren't about fighting, but they are about confrontations. And there's one person that there's one duel that hasn't happened yet that I'm dying to see. So that's all I'll say. But it's got to happen.
We hope it does, because I want Force Unleashed 2. When I finish that game, I always just go, and what now? And what now? Because it just seems like a filler. It seems like it's just put this here, and now let's wait for the third. And the third act. And so it's like waiting 10 years for the conclusion of a series that you've been reading most of your life.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just hope we don't actually have to wait 10 years, because that would drive me crazy. But
me too.
I hope you do get to finish it, because I have the first two on Audible audiobooks, which are quite good. I like them a lot because that is sound effects and so on. I listen to them when I'm moving around and walking and so on, and I love them that way. And then it also reference me to the games a lot, which I also play. Yeah, quite frequently.
Force Unleashed 3, I think, is one of the most important installments in Star Wars, whether I'm involved in it or not. I think that this story captures so much that's important about Star Wars. You know, redemption and betrayal, and you know, the balance. You know, all that stuff is in the story. There's romance. There's the beginning of the rebellion. Episode 3 has to be, if not the best Star Wars story ever told, then one of the best stories ever told. So it's got to happen. While it's not existing, it's this sort of gaping void in the Star Wars canon. It has to happen. Whether I'm involved or not, it's just that void has to be filled. And so those 3 books will stand as... You know, when I was pitched... when I was first just talking about The Force Unleashed, they were describing it as episode 3.5. And I think that's kind of true in a way. I think this little saga forms its own very, very important sort of episodes in between episodes 3 and 4, and I think it has to be brilliant. Absolutely has to be brilliant, and it has to be done.
So let's talk about the other Star Wars book which you wrote, the one related to this little tiny game, which I'm quite sure no one's ever heard of. It's one of these, little obscure games made by BioWare. No one's ever heard of that company. They don't do it.
BioWare, who's that? What game are you talking about?
I've never heard of them. But this little book called Fatal Alliance, I believe it's the first book in this series, obscure series called The Old Republic, talking about the game, of course.
Oh, oops.
So, what was it like to write in that one? Because I'm assuming you probably were familiar with Knights of the Old Republic, the 2 games that came before that, or at least somewhat familiar when you started writing, and you probably saw those trailers, those amazing, mind-blowing trailers.
Bane, wait. Bane. Did you hear him? Did you hear it in his voice? That's if I may, Mr. Williams.
Sure.
That was great. Just all you hear is, yeah. That's all you hear. It's like, you hear that guttural, like, oh, he knows, dude. Just let him talk. He knows.
Look, that was a completely different experience. It was an amazing experience. Completely different to doing the Force Unleashed books. When they said, do you want to do another computer game novelisation? I said, sure, I've got that down. I'll be able to knock that off. But of course, it was a completely different game and therefore a completely different book. And part of the problem was the parameters were changing a lot. We didn't quite know, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, I'm including myself in this. We didn't quite know what sort of book we wanted it to be. It started off being a novelisation, and then we very quickly realised that it couldn't be a novelisation because there were so many different points, not leading up to the story, but without actually giving away any story details, maybe using a couple of, NPGs that are in the game. And then we decided that we would do that and try and capture the feel of the game as much as possible. But of course, again, all I had was concept art. So concept art and the huge game bible, which was evolving constantly, absolutely brilliant, great stories, story arcs and character classes and everything. And the trailer, the fantastic trailer, came out when I was 3/4 of the way through the book, and we had this sort of slightly surreal conference call where in the previous 6 months I'd submitted 5 or 6 different story ideas that had been knocked back for various reasons. We finally all agreed on this particular story that I was going to tell. And then 3/4 of the way through the writing process, the trailer came out, and the trailer was so amazing. The trailer was absolutely brilliant, and everybody wanted to know more about the Sith character. So we had this kind of crazy conversation where they said, we've decided we'd like your book to include the Sith character, and in fact, we'd actually quite like the book to be set 20, 30 years earlier. Once they said, can we have a conference call, I thought, oh no, this is what...
Yeah, you saw that trailer. You did. You saw that trailer and you went, oh crap.
If only I'd known this was coming, but
Part of my laugh, that's funny to me.
I know, and I was laughing too on the inside and weeping at the same time.
Oh, I would be too.
But of course, there was no way we could rejig the story. The deadlines were so tight. I got to finish the story that I was telling the way I wanted to tell it, and somebody else got to write the book about that guy. Which was the better way to do it. He was such a good character in that sort of minute or two on the screen. He deserved his own book. So that was the right decision to make. And I understand the impetus, the sort of, we've got to get him in this book because it's the first one. It's the first book. We haven't got anything else scheduled. We've got to get this guy in there as well. But it all worked out well in the end. So again, just like the Force Unleashed books, it was very exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking because I hadn't seen the gameplay. Nobody had seen the gameplay, really, apart from the people working in the area. They gave me every single help every possible assistance they could. But because I enjoyed this process in a very different way. I mean, the Force Unleashed 2 was great because the story was kind of handed to me and I had some great dialogue, and it was just, my job was to kind of flesh it out and bring it to life. Fleshing it out makes it seem like a trivial job, but it's actually very hard to do well, and I spent a lot of energy on it and really enjoyed it. Whereas this story, I got to create my own characters, 99% of the time. I got to create my own story arcs with approval from everybody else and then explore the world. So again, I was the first player to play this game in a way, but I was playing it with sort of 6 characters.
You get to work with, I think it's Drew Karpatian who wrote a lot of the Old Republic, and then I believe he wrote Revan and a couple of the other Old Republic books. Did you ever get to work with him at all? Because I know he's the head writer for that game.
I might have met him when I was at Comic Con. My memories are a little bit vague on that because I was jet lagged. But no, there was a whole bunch of writers that I was conversing with. I've forgotten their names now, but we would have lots of discussions about what I could and couldn't do, what kind of things I could do with the character class. And then, of course, when we were editing the book, there were some threads that needed to be tweaked. It didn't sort of fit with the character classes, or was giving too much away about the arcs that were coming up in the game. So, in every likelihood, I'm embarrassed for not being able to remember, but in every likelihood, we did converse quite a bit about the stories and what we couldn't do. But it was, of my 6 Star Wars novels, I think that's my favourite because I like the characters, and again, they're all conflicted. They could all go either way. You know, I wanted to write characters that were like the reader in a way. You know, they were kind of just starting out on their journeys, just like the players of the game are just starting out on their journeys. That's kind of what I wanted to capture. So at the end of Great Alliance, hopefully I've left the reader with this feeling that these characters could now go anywhere. They know what kind of journey they want to go on, but they don't know what the journey will be yet, because that's what the game's about. You know, the game is about the journey that the players of the game will be going on, and that's the feeling I wanted to leave these characters with in the book. I get asked, will there be another Fatal Alliance book using those characters? And I do hope there will be, and I do hope those characters will appear again, whether I write them or not. But on the other hand, if it doesn't happen, then I quite like the thought of them being left in that point where anything can happen. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess with writing in the Old Republic, you also didn't have as much constraints to do with timeline, because like with Force Unleashed, of course, you're between 2 movies. You know where stuff has to begin and where stuff has to end, and there's constriction there. And then with the New Jedi Order, you're in a series that you have to fill in a certain hole, and then the next author fills in another hole. And so of course, you're constricted a little bit there. But I guess with this one, the Old Republic book, you had nothing had really written before, and nothing was really written, after. It was a big old chunk. So you had a lot more freedom, which I assume you quite enjoy.
Oh, he's got it, dude. He has to. I mean, think about it, man. From a writer's standpoint, even I could tell you that one. I mean, you sit there and you got this whole untapped part of time that nobody's done anything with. There's like thousands of years you can screw around with. It's almost like I have to ask you, this is my question. Knowing that, to you, being dropped into that timeline, did you feel like a kid in a candy store as a writer?
Oh, yeah. Every Star Wars novel, I feel like every Star Wars novel, I feel like that, because Wikipedia is a huge candy store, and I can kind of pick and choose whatever I want to play with as long as, people tell me I can. But the Old Republic, it was sort of I was constrained in a different way. I mean, you say there wasn't much written about that time, but in fact there was. It just hasn't been published. All the amazing writers working on the game have written so much background detail, so much history that kind of unpacks as you play the game down the years of gameplay that A, it's there, and B, sometimes you can't talk about it because it gives stuff away for something that might happen in 3 years' time. So there was that sort of double constraint. But the other pressure that I felt I was operating under when writing the Fatal Alliance was there was so much cool stuff that I wanted to put in that nobody had ever seen before. Whereas Wikipedia, it's kind of out there in public, anybody can find it. It's in a lot of games, a lot of TV shows, it's in a lot of the graphic novels. It's out there. Whereas this cool stuff, we haven't seen before. So I felt like I was under an obligation. Yeah, well, I was under an obligation to say the game.
Oh, dude, I'm just getting shiny. You said there's new stuff, and I'm like, oh, yes, I like that.
Yeah, I was aware that the book had to sort of capture the feel of the game and had to make people excited for the game. In a way, it's a story on its own, but it's also an ad for the game. So it's like the trailer. I wanted it to be as exciting as that trailer where people go, whoa, I want to run around with thousands of Jedi and Sith, but also come out of my book and going, wow, I want to play in that universe with all this cool stuff that we haven't seen, Mandalorians and all that kind of stuff. So I felt an obligation to fit as many character classes as I could in as viewpoint characters and capture as as much of what they do as possible. So that had its own kind of constraint. That's why the novel has 6 viewpoint characters. It's the most complicated novel I've written to date, and was very difficult to structure and very difficult to write. But it also made it immensely good fun. I remember there's a scene about a third of the way in where everybody finally comes together, and there's this huge kick-ass battle that goes for pages and pages and pages and pages. And I think I wrote that entire battle. It was like 8,000 words or something like that, in almost one sitting, because I was so excited by it and so excited that I'd reached that point, and was just having so much fun with these characters finally getting to, try and kill each other, which is what they're all about at that point. So I think if I'm having fun, then hopefully everybody else is. And I've had very positive feedback on that, which I'm very grateful for.
So one quick question then. Was Shane Dix a little jealous when you got to write more in Star Wars again?
Possibly.
I know you wrote 3 books, and I think you wrote a short story together too, didn't you? Or Die Trying or something like that?
Or Die Trying was actually the opening chapter of the 3rd book, which we ended up cutting. And I was very sad about that because it explained where the sort of human replica droids came from and some of the background for Jaina Solo. And I really wanted to show that sequence. So as soon as the opportunity to have it published appeared, I grabbed it wholeheartedly. But yeah, we wrote those 3 books and the short story together, and we also wrote another 13 novels together. So we had quite a long collaborative career together.
Yeah, you wrote the Orphans books together, and was it the other series, Evergence, I think it is?
Evergence and the Geodesica books we worked on together. So we wrote quite a lot of books together and a few short stories, and we just kind of wanted to go off and do our own thing. So that we're still mates. I mean, we live in the same town. He lives in my old house, in fact. So we're still very close, very good friends. So that we didn't have a falling out or anything. I think we just wanted to do our own stuff. I was doing solo novels kind of around our collaborations, and he was wanting to. So we just decided to kind of call it a day. We want to go back and do another Evergence book one day, and we might do another Star Wars together. But the trouble with the computer game novelizations is that a collaboration, even if we wanted to do it, wouldn't have worked because there's never enough time. They're always written under incredible time constraints because the scripts take so long to write and get perfected, and they're always running late. Just it's not anybody's fault. It's just the way it happens. But the publishing deadline, delivery date doesn't change at all. So sometimes I've had to write these books, in 4 weeks, which is fast for me, and there's no way I could fit another writer in there probably. So probably. But you never know. It's not impossible. I'd like to write with Shane again. It's good fun working with Shane. He keeps me sane.
Do you see what I have to deal with? No, in all seriousness, I love this dude. He's like one of my best friends. But honestly, I just want to say before you do have to get out of here, it's been so awesome talking to you, and I'm actually all excited about the next 15 minutes. Like even more so because I'm like, ooh, what's he gonna say? Pardon my fanboyness. I do apologize.
There's no need to apologise. I'm a huge fanboy myself. I love talking about Star Wars, and it's difficult to shut me up. I love going to conventions.
It's awesome.
So, a couple of questions, because the board we represent, the side we represent, most of us are writers. We like writing about Star Wars. A lot of us role-play Star Wars where we write, and we think we're awesome, but usually, well...
Fan fiction. It's like ongoing fan fiction.
There's nothing wrong with fan fiction, but one of the first things I ever wrote was a piece of Doctor Who fan fiction. So, and if the internet had existed back then, it would still be out there. So I totally understand it, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a great thing.
So what type of tips would you give to writers? Because we like writing Star Wars, obviously, because we all write Star Wars characters. And so, with your experience with writing Star Wars, what sort of tips would you give to aspiring writers or just people that want to write and make their writing more into the Star Wars universe rather than seem, for example, like a character that is just in Star Wars because he uses a lightsaber, or someone that actually that feels like he's in Star Wars and looks like so. What sort of tips would you give to writers like us?
Yes, please. We want to know.
I think anybody who wants to write anything needs to read really broadly and experiment with lots of things. So I'm sure so I would say the same thing to you as to somebody who would want to write Star Wars novels professionally. I mean, you need to write your own stuff, find your own voice as well, and that makes it easier to come back to Star Wars, to write in the Star Wars mode. It sounds kind of paradoxical, doesn't it? Does
Does that make sense, or am I making complete nonsense? I think
No, you know what?
Makes sense.
You know what? I can see where you're saying that might actually come off as like, what the hell? But to people like us and those that listen to this show, I guarantee you it makes complete, perfect, total logical sense. I assure you.
That's good. I think because I think part of the trouble with some fan writers is they are writing. I'm not saying this is true of you guys or anybody else that's listening. That I think it's inevitable that when someone writes, including myself, you have your own voice. It just comes out naturally. So when you're trying to write Star Wars, but it's coming out in your own voice. So I think what you need to do, or what, not getting you again specifically, but anybody, you need to kind of learn to enable you to chop out your voice in as much as that's possible, and then write in a slightly different voice. So when I'm writing a Star Wars novels, they're still written by me, and they still have my style, but they have less of my style than other books do, because I'm consciously trying to imitate great writers like James Luceno and Alan Dean Foster. I'm trying to kind of soak in, and George Lucas, trying to soak in that sort of ambience of Star Wars, the stink of Star Wars, if you like, just in order to kind of to produce it myself. And it's a very hard thing to define, a very hard thing to say. It's to describe exactly how I do it. It's not like when I'm writing a sentence, I'm thinking, right, this is going to be a Star Wars sentence, so therefore it's going to be like this. It's an attitude. It's an attitude of writing that I found very, very hard at first. But the first Star Wars novel I wrote on, the first draft I sent to Shane, was very different to the draft that came out, because I hadn't quite got the voice right, and every book is different. So I would advocate, as well as writing fan fiction, experimenting with your own voice, experimenting with different ways to write, and then you might find that when you come back to writing your next piece of fan fiction, or for the lucky ones, a piece of actual or official Star Wars fiction, then it might be easier. I hope that makes sense. I've never actually been asked.
I think I get what you're saying. It's kind of like when you write something, that your personality, whether you like it or not, is going to tend to bleed into whatever you're writing. And sometimes you got to kind of go into it and go, okay, this is more me than it is what I'm trying to do, so maybe I should change that.
I'm also, when I'm writing a Star Wars novel, I'm always thinking of the people higher up in the process. So Stuart Stoney, who's not there anymore, unfortunately, and Leland Shee, and my editor. I'm thinking, if ever I think they're not going to like that.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
Right.
Sometimes it helps to have somebody over your shoulder like that, I suppose. I mean, especially for a book, but I mean, for fanfic, it kind of sucks. You don't have anybody you could really go to, hey, what do you think? And you're going to get an honest opinion on it.
Yeah. And I often ask myself, I'm often asking myself, am I doing this because I want to do it, or am I doing it because it'll fit in the Star Wars universe? Because there are certain things that happen in the Star Wars. The Star Wars universe is incredibly huge and diverse, but there are certain things that happen there more often than not. That's why I talk about redemption, characters in conflict and the hero's journey, that kind of stuff. If stories that follow those kind of molds will fit more comfortably in the Star Wars universe. You can still do amazing things like have the Yuuzhan Vong roll in and kind of slaughter millions. But there's a Star Wars way. But of course, the great thing about fan fiction is you can do whatever you want. I mean, I can't, as a professional writer in the Star Wars universe, there are things I just cannot do. But a fan writer can do. So you're in this incredible, freeing, liberating position where you can do whatever you want in the Star Wars universe. That I can't do. So I kind of envy your freedom. I think you should listen to the advice that I just gave you and then completely ignore it and do whatever you want.
Well, if you ever want to be liberated in fan fiction and write whatever you want, we can give you the link to our website and you can always join.
Yeah, no, honestly, you know what? Every now and again, I mean, especially, I've always wondered that. Do writers role play? Because when you think about it, what freer place do you have where you can, kind of throw out all the ideas that you have going on in your head, and, it doesn't really matter if they work or not. You can actually see even, a fanfic or, role play. It makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Yeah. I role play through the novels. So Ula V, the spy character in Fate of the Alliance, is very much me in lots of ways. So that's how I role play. I wouldn't make a very good Jedi, I love
you want to make a Jedi? We got room. Come hang out, bro. We got plenty of room over there. We're always looking for people that want to hang out, have a good time, talk a little smack, friendly banner, and, write a character if they want. So feel free.
Yeah, cool.
So, again, when it comes to writing, you mentioned how, you got to find your voice about writing in, Star Wars universe and so on. So, just some quick questions. Like, what is the quickest you've ever been able to write? Like, you've written you said 3 months, so what's like the quickest book you've ever been able to write? And would you ever want to repeat said process?
When I wrote The Force Unleashed, the deadline was March the 1st, but I couldn't start writing until I had the finished script. And the finished script arrived February 1st. So I had to write the entire book in 4 weeks, which was 4,500 words a day. And I came out of that thinking, wow, that was great fun. But I never want to do it again. Then I was invited to do Fatal Alliance. So I said, this is brilliant. I've got a whole year to write this one. So there was a fixed deadline again. But it took us 10 months to agree on the story. And to get the Bible to me and all that sort of stuff. All sorts of institutional problems that, again, are nobody's fault. It's just the way it works out. So I had to write that book, which was sort of 50% longer, in 6 weeks. So that was 3,500 words a day. And I thought, well,
6 weeks?
I'm never doing that again.
Yeah, dude. Oh, my God. 6 weeks? Whoa.
The Force Unleashed came along, and exactly the same thing.
My mind is blown right now. I can't even comprehend that. Wow, man.
And the Force Unleashed
wow.
Because the script, there was no script for Juno, so I had to kind of write Juno's story, not from scratch, but there was no dialogue for me to work from, and so that was really hard. I swore never again. So those 3 books are.
I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting so much, but that.
Oh no!
That to me is crazy.
It's
wow,
crazy,
6 weeks? Wow, that's just. You know what? I don't know whether I should say that I'm upset at them for putting any author under that kind of a constraint, or if I should be thanking them because. If that was in 6 weeks, then you, sir, are a writing god. Because that's epic, and it took a month and a half. What?
Well, it was really hard work, but I think, I can write 2,000 words. This is all I do. I'm a full-time writer. But I got to live and breathe these stories every waking moment, and that was fantastic. It was my job to be the hugest Star Wars geek on the planet for 4 weeks, for 6 weeks, and who wouldn't love that? It was really hard. It was hard, really hard work. I was exhausted at the end of each of those runs, but I was also exhilarated, like I was on some kind of drug, I don't do cocaine or speed or anything like that, but I imagine it must feel like that, every fibre of you is alive. I don't recommend it. I reckon it's a very hard thing to do, but I loved it.
Yeah, but still, it's like, you can see that too, it's like, oh my God, I gotta get another chapter done. Hang on, let me get this line. Oh, yes, let's go. Oh, yeah, I'm cranking it out, baby. Yeah, nobody's.
But it wasn't like that. It was like, I get up in the morning and go, wow, today I've got to write another chapter. And it's going to be this chapter where this happens. And I'm going, wow, that's so cool. I can't wait. This is the day I break Admiral Akbar out of prison. Or this is the day where Starkiller brings Juno back from the dead. Or, who wouldn't want to go to work when that's your job?
Dude, man, I'm clocking in today. I don't know what I'm clocking out. Get about it. Let's go.
And that is exactly, being a Star Wars fan, that's our dream, waking up, living, breathing Star Wars. And it looks like we're going to have to start wrapping this up because, we need to respect your time. And, this has been amazing. This is going to be awesome to edit. So we'd like to thank you for being on because, honestly, you've given us so much more than we thought. And this has been a blast. We love talking Star Wars with actual Star Wars fans.
And I love talking. Likewise.
And this is awesome.
Dude, Ben, are you kidding me, man? This man right here, definitely in the top 3 now. Has to be.
Thank you very much. You're very kind. Thanks so much for having me.
One tiny little question. I do apologize.
Sure.
But
Okay.
what Bane just said just sparked this into my head, and I'm kind of upset I didn't think about it before. But the way Starkiller fights with his lightsabers, you know what I'm talking about? How he's got the one forward, the one kind of backward. Did you find that gave you any sort of leeway in writing how he does things in a fight?
Well, it was so much fun to research Whether any of that really came out in the story, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a sword fighter myself, but I've always wanted to be. But capturing the kinetic and visual sort of style in which he thought was less of a priority for me in the book, because I didn't want to bog the book down with that kind of detail too much. I wanted it to be about what's going through his mind, what he's feeling as he's fighting, not necessarily exactly how he's blocking or exactly how he's... So, and I also figured the computer game would cover that too. So if people wanted to know exactly what he was doing, they could go watch the game. They could do it themselves. But it's certainly knowing what was possible for him to do was important, because I didn't want it to say, and then he waved his sword and the Star Troopers dropped to the ground in 7 pieces. I wanted to feel a bit more real than that. So I did put a lot of research into it. I don't know whether that shows or not, but I felt every time I approached a fight scene, I thought, right, this time he's going to use this style, and that means he's going to act and feel this way, or he's feeling this way at the moment, therefore he's going to use this particular style. And of course, in the first book too, he's facing off with all those proxy characters. So he's facing up against Darth Maul, and he's facing up against
Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin.
Yeah, all that. And they all have different styles. So, and of course, his style responds to their style. So, because that's all he knows. At the beginning of that book, that's all he knows. All he knows is how to fight and how to kill.
Exactly. That's why I was asking that, because I look at it like that's what he does. He fights a lot. So that's why I was wondering. There's like just every time you ever see a lightsaber battle, or you ever hear about one, or you ever even read about one, it always ends up where even if they've got two, they're always upright. And that's why I wondered that, because it's got that one backward. Does that lend anything to the writing style? Which is so cool to hear about.
I had a lot of trouble writing the first book. Sorry, I'll just segue. But because he's so awesome, his power just keeps getting greater and greater and greater. So when I wrote the first scene of him being awesome, I was using all these words like awesome, he reached deep into the Force and did this stupendous thing. And then I hit the second one and thought, well, now he's doing the same thing, but even more awesomely and stupendously. What adjectives are I going to use? And because that happened times throughout the book, so it was really hard to come up with synonyms for awesomely and stupendous. And,
yeah, exactly. After a while, you're like, oh, crap.
So I eventually had to write the last one and then go back.
Well, anyhow, again, sorry for asking. I had to ask that
that's okay.
Just for my own thing, because I was like, you know what? I just thought of that, and I'll kick myself if I don't add.
If there's any questions left over, you never know, there might be word about The Force Unleashed 3 at some point, and I can come back.